In August 1997, South Park first aired on Comedy Central. Just over a year after that, in September 1998, Pokémon first broke into the US market with both the weekly anime and, of course, the classic red and blue video games. Who would have guessed that approaching 30 years later, both of these franchises would still not only be airing and releasing new content, but both going strong? I think if you asked Matt and Trey and the South Park staff, they would have said neither would be true. But since then, South Park's creators have signed a near $1 billion contract to renew their show through 2027, and Pokémon has become the literal highest-grossing franchise in the world, which makes South Park's third season episode Chinpokomon such a funny relic of the late 90s, because while it was a classic early South Park lambasting of a pop culture sensation, it was also pointedly so wrong about the future of Pokémon. So this year, for Pokémon Day no less, let's dive into the world of Chinpokomon. Season 3's Chinpokomon premiered in November 1999, just over a year after Pokemon broke into the mainstream in the United States. While this isn't the immediate pop culture turnaround we might be used to with South Park more recently, Pokemon was still very much in the zeitgeist. The trading card game had swept the nation for the entire year prior, and this episode actually released just 3 days before the highly anticipated Pokemon the First movie. So as usual, the South Park crew was on top of the trend. But why Chinpokomon?
Chinpoko means penis in Japanese, so Chinpokomon is a penis monster.
Yeah, that's early South Park for you. But I think the approach they took was a smart one. Considering the older audience of South Park, they basically honed in on how inscrutable Pokemon was to the adults who were dragged to see it with their kids. And as expected, this mostly stemmed from their own confusion in regards to what the hell it was even about.
All the writers sort of sat in a room and watched a Pokemon episode, and we all just were amazed at just how nothing happened.
This obviously leads to the nonsensical caricature of Pokemon they show within the episode, as well as the parents' deep confusion as to what the hell they were watching.
Be sure to tune in tomorrow for another inexplicable episode of Chinpokomon.
But the other major aspect that Matt and Trey latched onto in their parody was actually a product of the American marketing for Pokemon. Specifically, the American slogan, "Gotta catch 'em all," which was not directly taken from its Japanese counterpart.
The plot was all about you've got to collect the Pokemon.
Yeah.
Like the whole point of the show was collect all the Pokemon you could.
Yeah.
And then of course kids went out and bought all the Pokemon because it's the most genius thing ever, actually.
Yeah.
If you want to steal money from kids.
I've always said that this was one of the major reasons Pokemon has endured. The core mechanic is capturing and collecting. It's one of the reasons that it's one of the most popular trading card games of all time. Trading cards are built around collecting. Pokemon was already built around collecting. It's a match made in heaven, and it's a franchise that is meant to be enjoyed with others, whether that's trading or battling each other or just playing with friends. I'll talk a lot more about this aspect of Pokemon after we go through the episode. But obviously South Park was heavily inspired by that unabashed consumerist slogan.
I've got to buy Chinpokomon. I'm gonna buy it.
But the other thing this episode heavily touches on is social trends and fad culture, especially as a kid. The kids all obsessively seek out whatever newest Chinpokomon product is available for them to buy, all while Kyle lags behind every step of the way.
Cyborg Bill isn't cool anymore?
No, dude. Cyborg Bill hasn't been cool for a long time, Kyle.
I also love how the episode sort of frames the double-edged sword of following fads, with Kyle's dad telling him how thinking for yourself is much more valuable than following everyone else's lead, with Kyle laying it out pretty clearly for him that this isn't always the case.
In the real world, I can either get a Chinpokomon, or I can be the only kid without one, which singles me out and causes the other kids to make fun of me and kick my ass.
This was really what it was like at the time, and I'm sure it's still similar these days with modern trends for kids. Kids get hooked on whatever is new and exciting in popular culture, and if you even just want to hang out with those kids, you have to try and jump on that trend as well. For this entire episode, Kyle is playing Chinpokomon not because he likes it or even understands it, but because his 3 best friends are obsessed with it, and he wants to hang out with them. Even as a Pokemon fan growing up, I always thought this episode touched on some really specific aspects of childhood and fandom in a poignant way. Yeah, it's focused on popular culture trends and fads, but at the core of that are the hard truths about the difficulties of being a kid, the struggles of fitting in, and what it means if you don't fully fit in. But while South Park often has some poignant messaging and observation about kids and the human condition, their primary goal is always to make us laugh. And to Matt and Trey, Pokemon was so confusing and nonsensical that they they thought there was only one real explanation.
This has to be some kind of plot to take Pearl Harbor again.
And so, the other major aspect of this episode is that this is all a big conspiracy perpetrated by the Japanese government to infiltrate American culture and to finish the job at Pearl Harbor. Even the Chinpokomon video game is basically just a Pearl Harbor bombing simulation.
I've got to buy them all, so first I better go to Hawaii and visit Pearl Harbor.
Yeah, I guess if I played this video game it would feel pretty obvious, but the toy store owner first notices something is up with the Chinpokomon dolls.
What? I love you. Let's be best friends and destroy the capitalist American government.
I do think that a lot of this episode's premise in regards to the Japanese antagonists plays on lazy Asian stereotypes. The way they weasel out of being caught every time is to compliment those giant American dongs, which they insist are so much bigger than theirs. Obviously, this is a pretty persistent stereotype that, again, feels pretty lazy to me, even though it at least stems from the wordplay in the term Chinpokomon. But I do think the aspect of this that does hold up in a pretty funny way is how all of the American dudes just absolutely accept the ego stroke and let everything slide when they're told they're all well endowed. The way all the dads are smiling and looking down at themselves always makes me laugh, and let's be honest, this would have absolutely worked on Bill Clinton. That is accurate as hell.
And he assured me that I have a very large penis. He said it was mammoth. Dinosauric.
Clinton basically allows a bunch of foreign military bases to pop up all across the US, all because they complimented his dong. Classic Bill. Honestly, one sequence I kinda wish was longer was when the parents put the kids in focus groups to try and get them hooked on a new fad. The thing I think most about this every time I see this segment is the fact that they actually had to build a wild, wacky action bike for this sequence. South Park is a show that tends to be seen as a pretty quickly produced thing, but getting an art team to custom build this bike had to have been a whole endeavor. Definitely not something we'd see them do in newer seasons with their quicker production cycles. I genuinely wonder if this bike still exists anywhere and who has it. Maybe it's at South Park Studios. If anybody has any leads on who owns the wild, wacky action bike, sound off in the comments. Not sure if anyone's actually interested in the other toy they pitched, though.
Alabama Mile. He's quick, he's strong, he's active.
I bet these kids had a blast shooting this commercial. I miss when South Park put a little extra time into stuff like this. Kenny's death in this episode also had a special Pokemon-focused significance. He basically goes into a catatonic seizure for the duration of the episode before dying at the end, which is of course a reference to a real-world Pokemon incident. In 1997 in Japan, an episode of Pokemon featuring Porygon induced epileptic seizures in some of the kids watching at home. Over 600 were taken to hospitals. As a result, the episode was banned from the airwaves and never received an English translation. The episode kinda wraps up with the kids all having been brainwashed by Chinpokomon, which also gives us probably our most iconic image from the episode. South Park characters with full-on anime eyes. I do think this is how a lot of adults felt when seeing Pokemania in the 90s. There wasn't much in terms of anime that had hit the American mainstream at the time, and so something with such a different sensibility was likely confounding to the parents who were raised on mainstream American media. It must have been wildly confusing to see their kids so engrossed in something that they could barely comprehend, which is obviously an idea that's featured so prominently in this episode and echoed a bit in Matt and Trey's commentary, until of course the parents pretend to love Chinpokomon to snap their kids out of it. I think the "I learned something today" speech is one of my favorites in the show's history, with Stan basically just entirely flip-flopping the message so that Kyle doesn't bomb Pearl Harbor, initially pointing out that going with groupthink isn't healthy.
But if I stop now, I'd just be going with the group again. So to be an individual, I have to bomb Pearl Harbor. See ya.
It's a good example of how Matt and Trey prioritize comedy over any actual messaging, with the actual resolution to the kids getting brainwashed through groupthink episode being, actually groupthink is good sometimes. Though there obviously wasn't much of an actual message in the customary speech, I still maintain that this episode has a lot of pretty smart commentary in regards to following trends as kids. However, despite how many things Matt and Trey got right about growing up in fad-focused culture and the difficulties and dangers of following the crowd, there is one pretty specific message this episode has that has absolutely been proven 100% wrong over the 25 years since it released.
You see, son, fads come and go, and this Chinpokomon is obviously nothing more than a fad.
And obviously, I don't really blame them because I'm not sure anybody could have predicted the cultural stickiness of Pokemon, but one of the main things this episode does is paint Pokemon as just another meaningless fad that will die out quickly.
Which of course is all based on the Pokemon stuff, which at the time was at its sort of peak of popularity, I think.
It was scary huge.
This was the DVD commentary recorded a couple of years after the episode was produced, and they're sort of talking about it like it's over over and done with. And obviously Pokemon did have ebbs and flows to its popularity, and that initial Pokemania was unlike anything else, but even now in 2025, Pokemon is one of the most enduring franchises in history. There's a reason that it's earned more money than any other franchise that exists. And I think what it boils down to is the way Nintendo and the Pokemon Company navigated, pivoted, and evolved in the media landscape as they went. Obviously, they always had the video games and the anime, but introducing the trading cards, merchandise, and continuing to find new angles, even to this day, has allowed Pokemon to not just survive over 30 years, but thrive. There are so many ways to enjoy Pokemon now. 9 generations of mainline video games, countless spin-offs, 27 separate anime series with over 1,300 episodes total, 23 animated movies, plus the Detective Pikachu movie. In 2016, Pokemon Go became a massive cultural sensation and is still played to this day. Currently, the Pokemon trading card game might be at the height of its popularity due to the collector's markets. A Pocket app version of Pokemon trading card game is now absolutely dominating the mobile game market, and that doesn't even dive into the specific subcultures within those individual sides of Pokemon. It's not even that Pokemon is a niche, there are literally sub-niches within the niche. If you play the video games, you might be playing casually, but you also might be hardcore nuzlocking. You might be battling competitively. You might be a shiny hunter and collector. If you're into the trading cards, you might be playing competitively, collecting the art, or even investing in the products for monetary gain. There are too many aspects of the franchise to even touch on in this simple Chinpokomon video. Honestly, I kind of want to dive into the insane variety of the franchise in a dedicated video another time. All that to say, South Park could not have been more wrong about the longevity of Pokemon. I think, to a degree, they kind of acknowledged this by including them as collectibles in Stick of Truth back in 2014, and even then, there were 30 collectibles and they had to design a bunch more Chinpokomon than they had initially created in 1999. Implementing a popular RPG video game ripoff in your major RPG video game feels like an acknowledgement of Pokemon's impact. Even the way they got the kids to stop playing with Chinpokomon doesn't hold up to today's reality. The parents pretend to be super into it so that the kids think it's lame, but these days, there are parents who grew up on Pokemon and are now sharing the franchise with their kids. Multiple generations playing Pokemon together. And again, I'm not saying South Park should have predicted this. Who on earth could have? It's incredibly rare that a franchise ever transcends generations this way, but it is funny that this might be the thing that Matt and Trey were most wrong about in their long history of comedic pop culture evaluation. But I also know that Matt and Trey never expected South Park to still be around at this point. At the time they made Chinpokomon, they were on the record as anticipating maybe another season or two before throwing in the towel on South Park, and here we are in 2025 expecting to see season 27 in the fall. Honestly, both South Park and Pokemon are two of the most enduring animated institutions from the 90s. It's kind of insane. So with that having been said, it's no surprise that Chinpokomon remains one of South Park's most popular early episodes.
I stay mellow watching Johnny Two Cellos. He talks cartoons, he's a really cool fellow. He keeps you posted on adult cartoons. If that's what you're into, then grab a spoon and a very big bowl of your favorite cereal. Feels like Saturday morning cartoon material. Johnny Two Cellos, watch him on YouTube. Now enjoy this groove and bust a move.